The ocean gives no warnings, only seconds to survive. From a family devoured by a great white to a diver mauled by a tiger shark, these stories reveal nature's most merciless hunters in action. A surfer's quick instincts, a swimmer's vanished trace, and a fisherman's fight against a bull shark all show how thin the line is between thrill and tragedy. Even miles from shore, a fall into dark water can summon death from below. Every ripple hides a predator, every shadow a threat. Watch until the end. These true encounters prove that the sea always takes what it wants. On March 3, 2024, the Nelson family embarked on what was intended to be a peaceful weekend voyage along the South African coast. Daniel and Rebecca Nelson had spent years exploring the ocean with their two children, 12-year-old Mia and 9-year-old Ethan. The family loved the water more than anything else. They often sailed out during school breaks to enjoy diving, swimming, and fishing. Daniel worked as a marine engineer, fascinated by the ocean's vastness, while Rebecca, a teacher, loved documenting their trips through photos and videos. Together, they taught their children respect for the sea, though none of them imagined how quickly it could turn against them. That morning, the water off Gansby was perfectly still. The sky shone bright, the surface reflecting soft ripples of sunlight. The air carried the familiar scent of salt and warmth, and the gentle hum of waves against the yacht's hull filled the air. The Nelsons anchored near the edge of a reef, an area known for clear visibility and calm currents. A few other small boats drifted nearby, their passengers waving as they passed. Everything felt safe, ordinary, and inviting. Excitement built as the children slipped into their swimsuits and leaned over the side, eager to jump into the blue. Laughter echoed as they splashed and played, drifting a few meters away from the yacht while their parents joined them. The water was cool but soothing, and the family floated together, enjoying the serenity of the moment. Yet beneath them, in the vast space of the deep, something immense was moving. Unbeknownst to the family, a massive 6-meter great white shark was patrolling the same area, drawn closer by the vibrations of movement and sound above. The predator's silhouette moved like a shadow through the green-blue haze, silent and powerful, circling with purpose. From above, the surface gave no sign of what lurked below. Without warning, the calm was shattered. A sudden explosion of water erupted near the children. The enormous shark surged upward, jaws open wide, striking with terrifying speed. Witnesses from nearby boats saw the swirl of foam and the flash of white as the predator clamped onto the children and dragged them beneath the surface. The water turned crimson in seconds, waves splashing violently as panic spread through the family. Rebecca screamed for her children, thrashing toward the spot where the attack had begun. Daniel swam desperately, trying to reach the area, but the predator returned. The great white lunged again, its tail thrashing with brutal force, slamming into the adults as it charged. Daniel was struck hard by the shark's snout, spinning him backward through the water. Rebecca struggled to stay afloat, arms flailing as she was pulled into the churning foam. Nearby boats erupted in chaos as people shouted for help, throwing ropes and life rings into the water. The sea was alive with motion, a violent storm of spray and sound, as the predator circled once more. Every second seemed to stretch endlessly as the massive creature moved through the waves, striking again before vanishing below. The clear blue surface that had seemed so peaceful only minutes before was now filled with broken ripples, scattered debris, and pieces of floating clothing. The laughter that had filled the morning air was gone, replaced by the dreadful silence of open sea and the slow drift of waves reclaiming their calm. The water that had moments earlier shimmered with sunlight now drifted heavy with fragments and silence. Pieces of torn swimwear floated beside empty life rings, rocking gently on the small waves. The once joyful sound of splashing had been replaced by the low hum of nearby boat engines and the faint cries of stunned witnesses. Those aboard nearby vessels stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend how quickly the sea had turned violent. The smooth blue expanse hid everything beneath its surface, leaving no trace but a few ripples and stains fading into the current. A rescue team was dispatched within minutes after radio calls reached the harbor. Boats sped across the water, cutting through the waves with urgency. When they arrived, the scene was eerily calm again. The family's yacht rocked quietly, its ladder still hanging over the edge where they had entered the water. Inside, towels and cups of juice rested untouched, the morning's laughter still hanging faintly in the air. The rescuers searched desperately, pulling in every floating item they could find: goggles, fins, a camera strap, anything that could tell them what had happened in those terrible seconds. Divers entered the water, scanning the depths beneath the yacht. Visibility was poor, and the seafloor below was clouded with drifting sand and bits of broken coral. They found no sign of the family, only distant shadows moving in the gloom before vanishing into the darkness. The enormity of the predator's power became clear as the divers surfaced again, faces pale from what they had seen below. By the time officials reached the area, word of the tragedy had already spread across the coast. Fishermen and locals gathered on shore, their faces marked with shock. The Nelsons were well known in the region, respected and liked for their kindness and adventurous spirit. The reality that an entire family could vanish so swiftly beneath calm waters struck the community deeply. The following day, recovery teams continued searching, finding only small remnants of clothing and pieces of damaged flotation gear scattered far from the original site. Marine experts later examined the reports and confirmed that the predator responsible was likely a mature great white over 6 meters long, one of the largest ever documented near that coastline. They explained that the area around Gansbai was a feeding zone for seals and that swimming too far from anchored boats placed swimmers directly in hunting territory. The attack, though rare, showed the raw unpredictability of these waters. In the days that followed, officials enforced new safety measures, warning visitors to remain on board in known shark zones. Local guides and fishermen spoke quietly of the event, calling it one of the most devastating incidents the region had ever witnessed. The calm bay, once filled with holiday boats and laughter, carried an air of sorrow that lingered long after. The Nelson family's yacht was eventually towed back to shore, its deck still wet from the morning mist. The vessel stood as a silent reminder of how swiftly the ocean's beauty could shift into terror. The sea had given the family years of joy, yet in a single morning it had taken everything away, leaving behind only the quiet roll of the waves and a lesson carved deep into memory. On March 22, 2025, Petty Officer James Carver, known to his crew as Jimmy, prepared for what seemed like a routine naval diving exercise off the coast of Darwin, Australia. At 32 years old, Jimmy was an experienced diver, part of an elite underwater operations unit responsible for testing navigation and safety protocols in challenging marine environments. His calm nature and steady focus had earned him deep respect among his peers. His years in the Navy had shaped him into a man who trusted discipline, skill, and training more than luck. The sea was his second home, a place he respected, never feared. That morning, as the team assembled their gear under the bright tropical sun, there was no sign that this day would be any different from the many they had done before. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, calm and inviting. Once submerged, the divers descended in perfect formation, following compass routes through open blue water. The visibility was excellent. Sunlight streamed down through the surface, illuminating the sandy bottom far below. The rhythm of breathing through the rebreather was steady, and the communication signals between team members flowed smoothly. For nearly 20 minutes, everything went exactly to plan. The team adjusted depths, tracked bearings, and practiced emergency drills, their focus sharp and unbroken. Then the ocean changed. It was subtle at first, and a quiet shift in the water's mood. Small fish darted away in bursts, and a faint shadow moved across the edge of visibility. The divers slowed their movements instinctively. Out of the haze ahead, a massive tiger shark emerged, gliding with deliberate grace. It measured over 4 meters long, its stripes faint but clear against the deep blue. The team tightened formation, maintaining calm as they had trained for encounters like this before. But there was something different about this predator. It did not turn away. Instead, it circled them slowly, each pass bringing it closer. Jimmy held his ground, steady and alert. The shark's broad head tilted slightly, its dark eyes locked on his movement. Then, without warning, it surged forward in a blur of motion. In a single, explosive strike, its jaws clamped onto the back of his rebreather pack, shaking him violently. The force drove him downward, the world spinning in a rush of bubbles and water. The creature's tail thrashed with brutal power, pulling him deeper as he fought to free himself. Training kicked in. Jimmy reached for his dive knife, twisting his body with precision despite the chaos. As the shark dragged him into a spiral, he plunged the blade into the sensitive slit behind its gills. The reaction was instant, a powerful jerk as the predator released its grip. But not before its teeth tore through his shoulder, slicing through his wetsuit and flesh. Pain exploded through his arm, but survival instincts kept him moving. He tried to stabilize his position, but the bleeding wound drew the predator back. His vision blurred for a moment as he saw the shadow circling again, faster now. Before the shark could strike once more, two Navy safety divers rushed in from above, deploying acoustic deterrents that pulsed through the water with sharp frequencies. The predator flinched, veering away into the depths, its striped body fading into the blue void. The rescuers grabbed Jimmy, securing him with harness straps as they began their ascent. Blood clouded the water, swirling upward as they climbed toward the light. Each second felt endless as the sea churned around them, the silence broken only by the muffled hum of their equipment. As Jimmy and his rescuers neared the surface, the sunlight shimmered faintly through the water, a blurred promise of safety above the chaos. Every movement sent fresh pain through his shoulder, the torn muscle throbbing with each beat of his heart. Blood drifted in thin streams behind him, carried away by the gentle current. The safety divers held him firm, their ascent controlled, careful not to trigger another appearance from the vanished predator. When they finally broke through the surface, the calm sea seemed almost unreal, too peaceful after the violence below. The rescue vessel raced toward them, engines roaring as crew members leaned over the side, ready to pull him aboard. The divers guided Jimmy to the ladder, helping him up while medics rushed to his aid. His wetsuit was shredded across the upper torso, revealing a deep wound that ran from shoulder to chest. The team worked quickly, pressing bandages to slow the bleeding as his breathing came in short, uneven gasps. He stayed conscious, though pale and trembling from shock. Within minutes, the boat sped toward the nearest naval medical facility, cutting through the waves at full power. The atmosphere was tense but efficient. Every member of the crew knew how serious the situation was, yet no one panicked. Inside the small cabin, medical officers worked to stabilize Jimmy, keeping pressure on the wound and monitoring his pulse. The deep punctures and tissue damage were severe, but his heart remained steady. By the time they reached the dock, emergency teams were waiting. Stretchers, oxygen, and surgical staff were already in place. Jimmy was transferred directly into an ambulance and rushed into surgery. For 4 hours, doctors repaired torn muscle and stitched the jagged cuts left by the shark's teeth. The damage was extensive, but the quick response had saved his life. After the operation, he was moved to intensive care, where the rhythmic beeping of machines replaced the sounds of the ocean that had nearly taken him. The news of the incident spread quickly through the naval base. Reports of the attack reached higher command, triggering an immediate investigation. The tiger shark encounter shocked even veteran divers who had trained in dangerous waters for years. Safety officers reviewed equipment, procedures, and deterrent systems, determined to understand how the animal had gotten so close. For days, divers and instructors met to analyze footage from the training dive, adjusting tactics and introducing new sonar-based early detection systems. Meanwhile, Jimmy's recovery was slow but steady. The physical pain lessened with time, but the mental images stayed clear in his mind. The sudden rush of movement, the crushing bite, the swirling blue darkness. Yet he refused to let fear define him. Visitors often found him sitting upright in the hospital bed, watching the sea beyond the window with quiet determination. 2 weeks later, he was released from intensive care, his arm wrapped in thick bandages, his body weak but healing. The Navy recognized his composure and skill during the crisis, calling him an example of discipline under threat. His ordeal became a reminder that even the most trained professionals faced limits when nature's power turned unpredictable. In the months that followed, new safety regulations were added to every training program, including mandatory predator awareness briefings and the use of additional acoustic repellents during open water missions. The event marked a turning point in how the Navy prepared its divers. Jimmy's scar would remain, a lasting trace of survival beneath the waves, a silent mark of a moment when human strength met nature's ferocity and endured. On November 28, 2022, the sky over Noosa, Australia, glowed with soft orange light as the sun began to sink beyond the horizon. The waves rolled gently toward the shore, wrapping the coastline in rhythm and calm. Among the surfers that evening was 20-year-old Alex Grant, a local surf coach known for his energy and deep connection with the sea. From the time he was a child, the ocean had been his world. His father had taught him to surf before he could even swim properly, and through the years, he had built his life around those rolling tides. Coaching young surfers had become both his job and his joy, and many knew him as the one who never left the water before the last light disappeared. That November day had been long but satisfying. The lessons were finished, and the beach had begun to quiet as most people packed up their boards. Yet Alex, true to habit, stayed behind. The water had always been his escape, a place where every worry disappeared with the sound of crashing surf. He stood by his board, watching the colors fade from gold to crimson, and decided to catch just one more wave before heading home. As he paddled out, the sea shimmered with scattered silver flashes beneath the surface. Schools of baitfish darted in frantic patterns, a sign that larger predators were nearby. Alex noticed the movement but thought little of it. Such activity was common at dusk when marine life came alive. He pushed forward, eager for his final ride. The cool water glided around him, and the air carried a hint of salt and calm. Then, without warning, the peace shattered. The water beneath him exploded in a burst of motion as a 1.8-meter black-tip shark lunged upward from the dark depths. The impact was so sudden that it felt like being struck by a heavy current. Its powerful jaws clamped around his ankle, teeth slicing cleanly through his wetsuit and deep into muscle and tendon. The pain was instant and blinding. The shark thrashed, twisting violently, sending sprays of foam into the air. Alex kicked and struggled, fighting the pull of the predator as his surfboard rocked beside him. The water around him turned red as the shark's head jerked side to side with brutal force. Instinct took over. He swung his free leg hard, striking at the shark's snout with desperate power. After several seconds that felt endless, the predator released its grip and vanished into the blue. The sea went still again, as if nothing had happened except for the faint echo of his heartbeat and the spreading trail of blood. Dazed and trembling, Alex clung to his board. His foot throbbed, and every movement sent fresh waves of pain shooting up his leg. The setting sun painted the water red and gold, hiding the danger that still lurked below. Though the shark had disappeared, fear gripped him tighter than the wound itself. The surface looked peaceful again, but beneath it, nature's unpredictability had just revealed its sharpest edge. Alex tried to steady himself, his heartbeat pounding louder than the sound of the waves. The ocean swayed beneath him as he clung tightly to his surfboard, his vision hazy from pain and shock. Blood streamed from the deep wound on his ankle, mixing with the salt water and spreading outward in thin red ribbons. He knew he needed to reach the shore quickly before weakness overtook him, or the predator returned. Using his arms, he began paddling with every ounce of strength left in his body. The injured leg trailed limply behind, throbbing with each slight movement. The once peaceful sea now felt vast and threatening, every shadow beneath the surface stirring fear. The minutes stretched endlessly as he pushed through the gentle swells, the fading sunlight casting long streaks of orange across the water. Closer to shore, faint splashes echoed behind him. His friends, who had been gathering their gear on the beach, had noticed the struggle and were now racing toward him. The sight of familiar figures gave him strength. They reached him just as his arms began to give out, grabbing the board and pulling him toward the sand. When they lifted him from the water, the true extent of the injury became clear. His ankle was torn open, the wound deep and bleeding heavily. Without hesitation, one of them pulled the leash from a surfboard and wrapped it tightly around his leg to slow the bleeding. The group worked together, shouting for help as they carried him up the beach. A few beachgoers rushed over with towels and first aid supplies. The sound of sirens soon followed, echoing down the shoreline as paramedics arrived and took control. They placed him on a stretcher, securing his leg and starting treatment right away before speeding him to the nearest hospital. Under the bright lights of the emergency room, doctors cleaned the wound and worked to repair the damaged tendons. The bite had torn deep, but no major artery had been severed. The surgeons later said that the quick response of his friends had saved his life, preventing him from losing too much blood. After several hours of surgery, he was stable but exhausted, his leg wrapped in heavy bandages. News of the attack spread quickly across the local surfing community. Many were shocked that such an incident had occurred so close to shore, and in waters they considered familiar and safe. Marine experts later explained that dusk was a dangerous time, especially when baitfish were present, as sharks often hunted in low light when visibility was poor. The blacktip species, though smaller than others, was fast, strong, and capable of striking without warning when food was near. Weeks later, Alex began physical therapy, learning to walk again while adjusting to the stiffness and scars left by the encounter. Despite the pain and long recovery, his connection to the ocean never faded. Months passed before he returned to the beach, standing quietly at the edge of the surf where it had all happened. The setting sun reflected across the waves, calm, yet powerful. Though he would surf again, the experience left him with lasting respect for the unpredictable nature of the sea, a reminder that even a familiar horizon could change in a single moment. On September 3, 2019, the early light over Cottesloe Beach shimmered across the calm water, casting a golden hue on the surface. It was the kind of morning that 24-year-old Maya Roberts loved most. Born and raised in Perth, Maya had grown up beside the sea. From childhood, she had always been drawn to the waves, swimming before school, surfing with friends on weekends, and spending her free hours training in the open water. Her parents often watched with pride as she glided effortlessly through the surf, her movements sharp and steady, her focus unbroken. She had the discipline of a true athlete, and by her early 20s, she was training to compete in her first Ironman triathlon. Maya's dedication was unmatched. Each dawn, she followed a strict routine, tracking distance and timing every lap. For her, the ocean was both a challenge and comfort, a vast field where she could push herself beyond limits. The waters off Cottesloe had become her favorite training ground, familiar yet unpredictable. Locals knew that these same waters were home to juvenile great whites, often seen following schools of fish or seals near the shore. Warnings were frequent, but for swimmers like Maya, the risk had long been part of the sport. That September morning was clear and calm. The beach was nearly empty except for a few joggers and early risers. Maya adjusted her goggles, checked her watch, and entered the cool water. Her goal was simple: a 2-kilometer swim along the coast, just another step in her preparation for the upcoming competition. As she moved farther from shore, her strokes were strong and rhythmic, each breath even and deliberate. About 800 meters out, the world around her was quiet except for the gentle slosh of water against her wetsuit. Below, the ocean floor fell away into deeper blue. Visibility was fair, sunlight piercing through in soft, shifting beams. Unbeknownst to her, something large was gliding through the depths, silent, patient, and curious. Moments later, a sudden disturbance rippled across the surface. From the shore, 2 witnesses noticed a strange splash far beyond the swim markers. What had been a smooth pattern of movement broke into violent thrashing. For a few seconds, it was chaos. Water churning, white spray shooting upward, then sudden stillness. The sea returned to calm as if nothing had happened. Beneath the surface, the predator had struck with staggering speed. The great white, estimated to be 4.5 meters long, surged from below in a powerful burst. Its jaws closed around its target with crushing force, the impact instant and decisive. The sudden attack left no chance for escape or defense. The force tore through the water, scattering bubbles and debris in all directions. Within moments, the ocean swallowed the struggle, leaving behind only faint ripples and drifting fragments. Back on shore, people stared in confusion, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. Rescue teams were alerted immediately, and boats were dispatched within minutes to the coordinates where Maya had last been spotted. They combed the area for hours, searching for any trace in the vast expanse of blue. As the sun rose higher, only fragments began to surface. A torn piece of neoprene, a single flipper floating aimlessly. Hope began to fade as the rescue turned into a recovery effort. The calm water now carried the weight of loss, and whispers of disbelief spread across the beach. Boats moved slowly across the open water as search teams continued their efforts, scanning every ripple and shadow. Divers entered the sea in pairs, their lines cutting through the surface as they descended into the silent depths. Hours passed with no sound except the hum of engines and the soft lapping of waves. What had begun as a calm morning had turned into a scene of disbelief and sorrow. The ocean that once seemed peaceful now felt heavy, filled with a quiet sense of danger. By late afternoon, officials confirmed the worst. Only fragments of Maya's wetsuit and a single flipper were recovered, torn and frayed. The condition of the materials suggested a violent struggle and an immense force. Experts analyzed the marks found along the neoprene, concluding they were consistent with the bite of a large great white shark, estimated to be around 4.5 meters long. It had likely approached unseen from deeper water, using the still morning light to its advantage. News of the tragedy spread quickly through Perth and across Western Australia. Maya's family and friends gathered on the beach as the sun set. The shoreline quiet, except for the sound of waves breaking softly against the sand. Flowers were placed near her usual entry point into the water, the spot where she had begun her final swim. For those who knew her, the loss was almost unreal. She had trained for years, disciplined and careful, yet a few seconds had changed everything. In the days that followed, the beach was temporarily closed while Marine patrols monitored for shark activity. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning for movement in the shallows, while experts reviewed data from nearby tracking buoys. The event reignited a long-standing debate in Australia about human presence in the territory of marine predators. Many questioned whether enough precautions were being taken as more people entered the ocean for sport and recreation. Marine biologists explained that September marked the seasonal period when juvenile great whites often roamed closer to the coast in search of prey. While attacks were rare, the overlap between swimmers and these powerful predators was increasing. The sea, they said, remained an environment ruled by instinct and survival, where even experienced athletes were vulnerable. For weeks after the incident, people continued to visit Cottesloe Beach, standing quietly by the waterline. Maya's story became a reminder of both courage and fragility. She had devoted her life to strength and endurance, yet nature had reminded everyone how small humans could be in comparison to the vastness of the ocean. A memorial swim was held 1 month later, where dozens of athletes entered the water together, tracing the same route she had once trained along. They swam in silence beneath a clear sky, surrounded by lifeguards and boats, honoring the memory of someone who had lived her life in motion and met the sea without fear. The event left a lasting impact on the community and sparked further safety initiatives along the coast. Drone surveillance, warning systems, and increased awareness programs were introduced in her name. Even so, every swimmer who looked out at the endless horizon knew what the sea could hold: beauty, challenge, and sometimes danger beyond control. On March 8, 2025, the morning sun rose softly over the Brisbane River, casting golden ripples across the calm surface. Marcus Hall, a 28-year-old angler from Queensland, stood near the edge of his small motorboat, preparing his fishing gear for the annual recreational tournament. Fishing had been part of Marcus's life since childhood. His father had taught him the patience of waiting on quiet waters and the excitement of feeling a sudden pull on the line. Over the years, Marcus had grown into a skilled fisherman, known among local competitors for his steady hands and calm focus. This event was one he looked forward to every year, not only for the challenge but for the sense of peace it brought him. The Brisbane River, with its mix of salt and freshwater, had always fascinated him, a place where marine life thrived under the murky current. The day began quietly. Boats dotted the water, anglers casting lines and chatting on radios. The air smelled of fuel and damp earth, and gentle wind brushed across the river's surface. Marcus felt confident as he cast his line into the deeper section near the mangroves, hoping for a large barramundi, a prized catch among competitors. For a long while, nothing stirred. Then his line jerked sharply, his rod bent, and his pulse quickened. The tug was powerful, far stronger than he expected. He steadied his footing, thinking he had hooked an enormous fish. The struggle grew intense as the reel screamed and the rod flexed dangerously close to breaking. Other nearby anglers turned their heads, watching as Marcus braced himself, reeling with all his strength. The water began to churn, bubbles rising in thick bursts, and then, without warning, the surface erupted. A massive bull shark, nearly 3.5 meters long, exploded upward, jaws snapping around the fish Marcus had been fighting. The force of its lunge sent a spray of brown water high into the air. The sudden impact rocked the small boat, slamming its side with a deep, hollow thud. Marcus stumbled backward as the shark's tail smacked the hull, the sound echoing like thunder across the river. Before he could regain his balance, the second collision came. The predator rammed again, and the boat tilted dangerously. Marcus lost his footing completely and tumbled over the edge, plunging into the dark water below. The river felt cold and heavy, the shock of it stealing his breath. For a brief moment, silence filled his ears, broken only by the sound of bubbles and his racing heartbeat. Then, through the murky current, a shadow appeared. The bull shark's shape was unmistakable, thick, muscular, and moving with steady confidence. It circled him once, brushing its rough skin against his torso like coarse sandpaper. Marcus kicked to keep distance, but the predator returned, this time bumping harder. The third pass came with a quick bite, teeth clamping onto his calf before letting go. Pain seared through his leg, hot and sharp, clouding his mind with panic. Blood drifted through the water in faint red trails, spreading fast in the slow current. The shark's body turned again, drawn back by the scent. Marcus, still clutching his fishing rod, swung wildly, jabbing at the predator's snout in a desperate attempt to drive it off. Each strike felt weaker than the last, yet determination kept him fighting. The next second stretched endlessly, the river swirling with fear and survival. The water churned as Marcus kept striking with all the strength left in his arms. The bull shark twisted sharply, brushing close once more before turning away into the deeper current. His chest heaved as he tried to stay afloat, the pain in his leg pulsing with every kick. The surface rippled with waves and debris from the struggle, and his small boat drifted several meters away, rocking unevenly from the earlier impact. Nearby competitors had seen the commotion and raced their boats toward him. As one vessel reached his position, two men leaned over and pulled him from the river. His leg was torn and bleeding heavily, his body trembling from shock and exhaustion. They laid him flat on the deck while another pressed fabric around the wound to slow the bleeding. The water around them still swirled faintly red as they sped toward the nearest dock. By the time they reached the shore, local officials and medics were already waiting. Marcus was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, his skin pale and cold. The team worked quickly to clean the wound and stabilize him before rushing him to a nearby hospital. Hours later, doctors confirmed he had deep punctures and torn muscle, but no broken bones. The bite had missed major arteries by inches, a narrow escape from what could have been fatal. News of the attack spread across the tournament site and soon reached the city. Organizers called off the event, warning participants about increased bull shark activity in the river. Experts later explained that these sharks often travel far inland through brackish water, drawn by movement and sound, making them one of the few species capable of thriving in both fresh and salt water. For Marcus, the experience left deep scars, both visible and unseen. Weeks of recovery followed, with physical pain slowly fading while memories of that dark, swirling moment remained. He had entered the tournament for sport and calm, but had instead faced one of nature's most fearless predators. The incident reminded many that even quiet rivers could turn dangerous within seconds, where survival depended not on skill alone, but on sheer will to endure. On October 3, 2021, 42-year-old David Lang stood on the upper deck of a Pacific cruise liner, cutting through rough seas. He was a travel photographer from New Zealand, known for chasing dramatic weather and capturing the moods of the ocean. Years of work had taken him to distant coasts, from icy fjords to coral lagoons, but the Pacific always felt like home. This trip was meant to be both work and escape, a chance to gather new material while taking a quiet break after months of back-to-back assignments. The storm that morning had rolled in faster than expected, thick clouds swallowing the horizon as rain fell in heavy sheets. Most passengers had already taken shelter below, leaving the deck empty except for David, his camera gear, and the restless wind. He moved carefully along the slick rail, trying to photograph lightning striking far across the dark sea. Waves crashed against the hull, their spray mixing with rain. Then, without warning, the ship lurched sharply. The deck tilted and his foot slipped on the wet surface. In a split second, the world turned upside down. He hit the railing, tried to grab hold, but the force of the storm wrenched him free. His body plunged into the black water below, swallowed instantly by the churning sea. The cold shock took his breath away. Rain hammered the surface and the ship's lights blurred into the distance as the massive liner continued its course, unaware of the man who had vanished into the storm. Panic struck first, followed by raw instinct. David kicked upward, breaking through the surface, gasping for air. The waves tossed him violently, pulling him under and throwing him back up again. He saw flashes of debris drifting in the water, pieces swept overboard by the storm. Among them floated a white plastic cooler, its lid half broken but still buoyant. He clung to it desperately, using it to keep himself afloat, as the ship's faint glow disappeared into the distance. Minutes turned into an hour. The rain eased slightly, but the darkness remained heavy. The storm clouds began to thin, revealing an endless stretch of open sea around him. Every muscle in his body ached from the struggle. He tried to stay calm, floating and breathing steadily. But soon something changed beneath him. The water grew unnaturally still and faint shadows began to move below the surface. Two sleek fins appeared, slicing through the water with deliberate grace. Oceanic white-tip sharks, bold and persistent hunters of the open sea. At first they only circled. Their pale tips shimmered in the faint light as they moved closer. Drawn by the scent of blood from a scrape on his leg, and the distant remains of debris drifting nearby. One brushed against him, its rough skin scraping his calf. Then came the first test, a sudden nip, quick but sharp, tearing through the outer layer of skin. David's pulse surged. He kicked out hard, splashing and twisting to drive them away. The cooler rocked beneath him, nearly slipping from his grasp. The predators regrouped, circling again, slower this time, studying their prey. The open sea around him was silent except for his splashing and the faint hiss of wind. Each second felt longer than the last as the fins cut closer once more, and David prepared himself for whatever came next. The sharks moved closer, their movement slow and sure, circling the man and the cooler like silent hunters in command of the sea. The water rippled with every pass, each glide bringing them nearer. David's arms trembled from holding on, but he refused to let go. His legs kicked weakly, sending bursts of foam that momentarily kept the predators at a distance. One brushed its snout against the cooler, testing it, while another slid beneath him, vanishing into the deep before rising again in a slow arc. The cold salt water stung his wounds, and his body shook with exhaustion. The endless blue around him felt alive, filled with unseen danger waiting just below. Time dragged, his thoughts blurred between fear and hope. The horizon stretched empty in all directions, no sound but the gentle slap of waves and the faint swirl of fins. His mind fought the heavy pull of fatigue as he struggled to keep his grip. The cooler creaked and rocked, half submerged from his weight. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the sharks began to lose interest. One made a final pass, brushing his ankle before turning away. The shapes faded into the depths, leaving the sea eerily calm once more. Moments later, a distant thumping noise broke the silence. The faint rhythm grew louder until a helicopter came into view, circling above the waves. A spotlight cut through the gloom, sweeping across the surface until it caught the sight of a man clinging to a white object. A rescue cable dropped through the mist, and within minutes, David was lifted clear of the water, body limp from exhaustion, but still breathing. When they reached the ship's medical bay, crew members treated the deep scrapes and bruises along his legs and arms. Though his injuries were minor, the shock had left him pale and trembling. In the days that followed, he often sat silently by the window, staring out at the ocean that had nearly taken his life. The storm, the fall, and the circling shadows had shown him the thin line between safety and danger, between life and what waits beneath the waves.